The autumn breeze swept through the crowded hallways of Riverside High as campaign posters fluttered against the walls. My face stared back at me from dozens of carefully designed posters, each bearing the slogan, "Choose Chase Mitchell, your voice, your future." I adjusted my blue tie the same shade as our school colors and took a deep breath. Being a junior class president had prepared me for this moment, but running for senior class president felt different. This time, I wasn't just running against anyone, I was running against her. Emma Lawrence. The name alone made my stomach twist in knots. She'd transferred to Riverside at the beginning of junior year, and within months, she'd become everyone's favorite overachiever. While I'd spent 3 years building my reputation through student government and varsity baseball, she'd swept in with her perfect GPA, debate team championships, and that infuriatingly genuine smile that made everyone, students and teachers alike, fall in love with her. "Your posters are crooked," a familiar voice called out behind me. I turned to find Emma leaning against a locker, her campaign button gleaming against her cream blazer. Her own posters, professional-looking designs in purple and gold, dominated the opposite wall. "Crooked posters, crooked politician." "Funny," I replied, straightening a poster that didn't need straightening. "Shouldn't you be practicing your debate rebuttals or organizing another charity bake sale?" She pushed off the locker and walked toward me, her brown eyes sparkling with that competitive fire I'd grown to both admire and resent. "Actually, I'm heading to the newspaper office. They're interviewing both candidates for tomorrow's edition. But I'm sure you knew that, being so experienced and all." I hadn't known that. My campaign manager, Tyler, was supposed to handle my schedule, and he'd clearly dropped the ball. Emma must have read the panic in my eyes because her expression softened slightly. "The interview's at 3:45. Don't be late, Mitchell. I'd hate to win just because you forgot to show up." She walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of vanilla and the distinct impression that she'd just done me a favor, which somehow made it worse. The thing about Emma Lawrence that drove me crazy wasn't that she was smart, I was smart too, or that she was popular, I had my own following, or even that she was genuinely nice, which made it impossible to truly dislike her. It was that she made everything look effortless. While I spent hours rehearsing speeches and organizing campaign events, she seemed to float through it all with natural grace. That afternoon, I arrived at the newspaper office at 3:40, determined to be early. Emma was already there, chatting with Sarah Chen, the editor-in-chief, like they were old friends. Of course they were. The interview was supposed to be separate, but Sarah suggested we do it together to capture the dynamic between the candidates. What followed was 45 minutes of the most intense verbal sparring I'd ever experienced. Every policy proposal I presented, Emma had a counterpoint. Every initiative she suggested, I found a flaw. But somewhere between arguing about cafeteria reform and debating the merits of multiple spirit weeks, something shifted. I found myself actually listening to her ideas about creating study groups for struggling students, matching them with peer tutors who shared their interests. It was brilliant, actually. And when I talked about my plan to start a student-run coffee shop to fund extracurricular activities, I caught her nodding thoughtfully. "That's actually not a terrible idea," she admitted during a break. "The entrepreneurship angle could look good on college applications." Did Emma Lawrence just agree with me? Should I check if hell froze over? She rolled her eyes, but I caught the hint of a smile. "Don't let it go to your head, Mitchell. I still think my proposal for extending library hours is better than your Friday Night Lights gaming tournament idea. The gaming tournament would bring together different social groups." I protested. "Not everyone wants to spend their Friday night studying, Lawrence. Some of us have Yale interviews to prepare for," she shot back, but there was no real venom in it. After the interview, Sarah showed us some preliminary photos for the article. There was one that caught my eye, Emma and I facing each other in profile, both mid-argument, but both also clearly trying not to smile. Something about it made my chest tight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the interview, about how Emma's eyes lit up when she talked about her plans for the school, about how for a brief moment, we'd actually work together instead of against each other. It was terrifying how natural it had felt. The next morning, I arrived at school early to find someone had vandalized all my posters. Crude mustaches and glasses were drawn on my face, and several posters had been torn down completely. I stood there, staring at the mess, when I heard rapid footsteps approaching. Chase. It was Emma, running down the hall, her face flushed with anger. I just heard what happened. This isn't okay. We need to report this to Principal Matthews. Why do you care? I asked, more sharply than I intended. This probably helps your campaign. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. Is that really what you think of me? That I'd celebrate this? She shook her head, disappointment evident in her expression. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe this is exactly the kind of president you'd be, someone who assumes the worst in people. She turned to leave, but not before I caught the hurt in her eyes. And suddenly, I felt like the biggest jerk in the world. Because Emma Lawrence might be my rival, but she'd never been cruel. She'd never been anything less than fair, even when we were at each other's throats. Emma, wait. I called after her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. She stopped but didn't turn around. You know what the worst part is, Chase? Yesterday, during that interview, I actually thought. She trailed off, shaking her head. Never mind. Good luck with the cleanup. As I watched her walk away, I realized something that would change everything. I was falling for my enemy. And if the way my heart clenched when she disappeared around the corner was any indication, I was falling hard. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would turn both our worlds upside down. Because sometimes, the person you're running against becomes the person you want to run away with. And sometimes, the biggest campaign of your life isn't for student body president at all, it's for someone's heart. The next 2 weeks were a blur of campaign speeches, heated debates, and stolen glances across crowded hallways. Every time I saw Emma, I remembered the hurt in her eyes that morning, and something in my chest ached. I threw myself into campaign work, trying to distract myself from thoughts of her, but somehow everything circled back to Emma Lawrence. It didn't help that we kept getting paired together for our AP chemistry lab sessions. Dr. Torres, our teacher, insisted on maintaining his alphabetical pairing system. Lawrence and Mitchell, stuck together twice a week for 2 hours, measuring reactions and trying not to create any of our own. You're adding too much sodium hydroxide, Emma said one afternoon, reaching for the beaker in my hand. Our fingers brushed, and I nearly dropped the whole thing. Chase. Are you trying to ruin our titration? Sorry, I mumbled, stepping back to let her take over. I was distracted. By what? Planning your next campaign move? There was an edge to her voice, but also something else, uncertainty, maybe. I saw your new posters. The Mitchell's mission slogan is actually pretty clever. Was that a compliment, Lawrence? Should I record this historic moment? She rolled her eyes, but I caught the slight upturn of her lips. Don't push it, Mitchell. We still have to finish this lab report, and I'm not letting your ego tank my perfect GPA. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that feels more intimate than conversation. I watched her methodically record our measurements, her handwriting neat and precise, a loose strand of hair falling across her face. Without thinking, I reached out to tuck it behind her ear. She froze, her pen hovering above the paper. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Chase. She started, but the bell rang, shattering the moment. She quickly gathered her things, practically running from the lab. That evening, I was in the school gym, helping set up for the upcoming debate. Tyler was running through our strategy when Emma burst through the doors, clutching her phone, her face pale. Chase, we need to talk. Now. Something in her voice made me follow her without question. In the empty hallway, she showed me her phone. Someone had created an anonymous Instagram account posting edited photos of both of us, photos that made it look like we were sabotaging each other's campaigns. There were screenshots of fake texts, doctored images of us destroying each other's posters, even a manufactured audio clip that supposedly caught us both plotting against each other. "This is bad," I said, scrolling through the posts. "Really bad." "It gets worse," Emma replied, her voice shaking slightly. "They're threatening to send these to the school board if we don't both withdraw from the race. Check your email." Sure enough, there was an anonymous message in my inbox with the same threat. The sender claimed to have more evidence and gave us 48 hours to announce our withdrawal. Who would do this? I wondered aloud. And why target both of us? Emma paced the hallway, her campaign heels clicking against the linoleum. "Think about it, Chase. Who benefits if we both drop out?" The answer hit me like a thunderbolt. Jessica Martinez. Jessica had been running a distant third in all the polls. If Emma and I both withdrew. "We need to work together on this," Emma said, meeting my eyes. "I know we're supposed to be rivals, but—" "I'm in," I interrupted. "Whatever you're planning, I'm in." She blinked, surprised by my quick agreement. "Just like that?" "Just like that." I stepped closer to her. "Look, Emma, about what happened in the lab today. We should focus on solving this first." She cut me off, but her cheeks flushed pink. "Meet me at Riverside Coffee after school tomorrow. We can plan our counterattack." I agreed, trying to ignore how my heart raced at the prospect of spending time with her outside of school. As she walked away, I called out, "Hey, Lawrence." She turned. "Yeah. For what it's worth, I'm glad we're in this together." The smile she gave me made me forget all about campaign strategies and rival candidates. "Me too, Mitchell. Me too." The next day, I arrived at Riverside Coffee 15 minutes early, only to find Emma already there, surrounded by papers and nursing what I assumed wasn't her first cup of coffee. She'd changed out of her campaign outfit into jeans and a Yale sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked real. Beautiful. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "You're wearing pants," I replied brilliantly. "I don't think I've ever seen you in anything but skirts and blazers." Now she did look up, arching an eyebrow. "Do you make a habit of noting what I wear, Mitchell?" Before I could dig myself into a deeper hole, she pushed a coffee cup toward me. "Black with 2 sugars, right? I noticed that's what you always drink during morning student council meetings." The fact that she knew my coffee order shouldn't have made me as happy as it did. "You know, if anyone saw us right now, they'd never believe we're supposed to be bitter rivals." "Maybe that's the problem," she said softly, closing her laptop. "Maybe we've been so focused on being rivals that we forgot to be anything else." The way she looked at me then made me forget about the Instagram account, the threats, everything except the way the afternoon sunlight caught her eyes. I opened my mouth to say something, though I had no idea what, when her phone buzzed. The color drained from her face as she read the message. "Chase, they've moved up the deadline. We have to withdraw by midnight tonight, or they're releasing everything." "Let them," I said, surprising myself with my vehemence. "Those photos are fake. We can prove it." "Can we?" "In time." "Chase, this could ruin both our chances at college. Yale, Stanford, they look at everything, including social media scandals." "So we fight back," I insisted, reaching across the table to take her hand. She didn't pull away. "Together. Unless you don't trust me." Emma turned her hand to interlace our fingers, sending sparks up my arm. "That's the crazy thing, Chase. I think I trust you more than anyone right now. What happened next would change everything. Because sometimes the person you're running against becomes the person you run to. And sometimes, the biggest threats come from where you least expect them." That night, Emma and I worked late into the evening at her house, trying to track down the source of the fake photos. Her parents were at some charity gala, leaving us alone in her family's study, surrounded by takeout containers and her father's imposing law books. "Look at this," Emma said, enlarging one of the doctored images on her laptop. "The metadata shows these were all edited using the same software, and..." She trailed off, her eyes widening. "Chase, these were edited using the school's multimedia lab computers." I leaned closer, my shoulder brushing against hers. "How can you tell?" "The software license number. It's registered to Riverside High." She turned to face me, so close I could see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Whoever did this has access to the multimedia lab after hours." "That narrows it down," I said, trying to focus on the investigation and not on how Emma's vanilla scent was making my head spin. "The multimedia lab is only accessible to yearbook staff, newspaper team, and..." "The student council executive board," Emma finished. "Including Jessica Martinez." "And us," I added grimly. "Which means if we accuse her without proof, she could easily turn it back on either of us." Emma stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "We need help. Someone who knows computers better than we do." "I might know someone," I said slowly. "But you're not going to like it." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in Marcus Wong's basement. Marcus, the school's resident computer genius and, more importantly, my ex-best friend. We'd had a falling out sophomore year when he'd started dating my sister Lily, then broke her heart. We hadn't spoken since. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said, looking between Emma and me. "You two sworn enemies and rival candidates want my help to track down someone who's trying to force you both out of the race." "We're not enemies," Emma and I said simultaneously, then looked at each other, startled. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Right. And you came to me because..." "Because you're the best coder in school," I admitted reluctantly. "And because you owe me." "I owe you. For what?" "For punching me in the face when Lily and I broke up." Emma's head snapped toward me, surprise evident in her expression. I felt my face heat up. "You broke my sister's heart." "I broke her heart." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Did you ever ask her what actually happened? Did you ever wonder why I never defended myself?" The room fell silent. Emma cleared her throat. "Look, whatever happened between you two, we really need help. Someone is threatening to destroy both our futures. Please." Marcus looked at Emma, then at me, then sighed heavily. "Fine. But after this, Chase, you're going to talk to Lily. The real story needs to come out." For the next few hours, Marcus worked his magic, tracing IP addresses and decoding metadata. Emma and I watched in nervous silence as lines of code scrolled across his screens. Around midnight, he sat back in his chair. "Well, I've got good news and bad news," he announced. "Good news, I know who sent the threats. Bad news, it wasn't Jessica Martinez." Emma leaned forward. "Then who?" Marcus turned his screen toward us. "The threats came from Principal Matthews' computer." The shock hit me like a physical force. "That's impossible. Why would Principal Matthews want to force us out of the race?" "Maybe because both of your campaign platforms include proposals to investigate the school's budget allocation," Emma said slowly. "Chase, your coffee shop idea would require financial transparency, and my extended library hours proposal would need budget justification." "There's more," Marcus interrupted. "I dug deeper into the school's financial records, don't ask me how, and found some irregularities. Large sums of money being moved around, disguised as facility maintenance costs." "Embezzlement," Emma whispered. "But Principal Matthews has been at Riverside for decades. He's won educational leadership awards. He's been stealing from the school," I finished, feeling sick. "And our campaigns threatened to expose him." Emma grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. We need proof. Real proof, not just computer trails. The proof would be in his office computer, Marcus said. But you'd need physical access to it. The system's not connected to the external network for security reasons. Emma and I looked at each other, having the same thought. The overnight senior lock-in, we said together. It's this Friday, Emma continued. The whole senior class will be in the gym for the traditional all-night party before campaign speeches on Saturday morning. Principal Matthews' office would be empty. And I have access to the master key, I added. As junior class president, I'd been given emergency access keys. I was supposed to turn them in when the senior campaign started but had conveniently forgotten. Marcus looked between us, shaking his head. You two are crazy. Breaking into the principal's office? That's not just attention-level trouble. That's expulsion, maybe even legal trouble. We don't have a choice, Emma said firmly. He's stealing from the school, Marcus. From the students. And he's willing to destroy our futures to cover it up. If we get caught. I started. We won't. Emma's eyes blazed with determination. We'll have the whole senior class as our alibi. And. She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. And we'll have each other's backs. The way she said it made my heart skip. Here was Emma Lawrence, perfect student, Yale hopeful, suggesting we commit what was technically a crime. And somehow, it only made me fall for her more. I'm in, Marcus said unexpectedly. I can guide you through downloading the files once you're in. But you'll need a distraction to make sure no one notices you're gone from the lock-in. Leave that to me, Emma said, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. I know just the person. As we left Marcus's house that night, walking close together in the cool evening air, Emma suddenly stopped. Chase. What your sister did, what if it's like this situation? What if there's more to the story than you know? I thought about Marcus's words, about unheard sides of stories, about how I'd been so sure Emma was my enemy until I actually got to know her. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm starting to learn that things aren't always what they seem. She stepped closer, her face tilted up toward mine in the streetlight. And what about us? What do we seem like? My heart thundered in my chest as I looked down at her. I don't know, I admitted. But I'd like to find out. For a moment, I thought she might kiss me. For a moment, I thought I might kiss her. Then her phone buzzed her parents, wondering where she was. The moment broke, but something had shifted between us, something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. As I watched her walk to her car, I realized that uncovering the truth about Principal Matthews wasn't the only thing I was afraid of anymore. I was afraid of what would happen after when the truth came out, when the campaign ended, when we no longer had a reason to be in this together. Because sometimes the person you're running against becomes the person you can't imagine running without. And sometimes, the biggest risk isn't in breaking the rules, it's in breaking your own heart. The senior lock-in started like any other school event, pizza boxes stacked in corners, music pumping through speakers, and teenagers trying to act like they weren't nervous about tomorrow's speeches. But for Emma and me, every minute felt like an eternity as we waited for our moment. Your sister's in position, Emma whispered as we sat in the bleachers, pretending to watch the dodgeball tournament. After our talk with Marcus, I'd finally reached out to Lily. Turns out, she'd broken up with Marcus because she'd gotten early acceptance to UCLA but couldn't bring herself to tell him she was leaving. She'd been carrying that guilt for 2 years and now she was helping us, running tech for tonight's activities. And Jessica? I asked. The irony of asking our supposed rival for help wasn't lost on me, but when Emma had explained everything, Jessica had been surprisingly eager to assist. Apparently, she'd suspected something was off about the school's budget too. Ready with the performance of her life, Emma smiled. Who knew our third-place candidate was also the star of the drama club? At exactly 11:30 p.m., our plan kicked into action. Jessica, in full dramatic mode, started a passionate impromptu speech about school unity and ending toxic rivalry. As all eyes turned to her, Emma and I slipped out the gym's side door. The empty school corridors felt different at night, our footsteps echoing despite our attempts to stay quiet. Emma's hand found mine in the darkness, and I squeezed it reassuringly. We'd practiced this route a dozen times during lunch breaks, but now, with everything on the line, each shadow seemed to hide a threat. "Wait," Emma whispered suddenly, pulling me into an alcove. Footsteps passed by the security guard making his rounds. My heart hammered against my ribs, aware of how close Emma was pressed against me in the narrow space. She looked up at me, her eyes wide in the dim emergency lighting, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. "Chase," she breathed, "if we get caught." "We won't," I promised, though I knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep. "Emma, I need to tell you something. In case things go wrong." "Don't," she cut me off. "Tell me after. Tell me when we've won." The footsteps faded, and we continued our journey to Principal Matthews' office. The master key worked, just as we'd hoped, and soon we were inside. Emma immediately went to the computer while I kept watch. "Marcus," she whispered into her phone, "we're in. Talk me through it." What happened next was like something out of a movie. Emma, following Marcus's instructions, bypassed the computer's security while I stood at the door, every nerve on high alert. We found the file's years of financial records, all doctored to hide the missing funds. Principal Matthews had been stealing money meant for student programs, athletics, even scholarship funds. "Got it," Emma said, holding up a USB drive. "Let's." The door handle started to turn. In that split second, I made a decision that would change everything. I shoved the USB drive into Emma's hand and pushed her toward the office's connecting door that led to the conference room. "Run," I whispered. "I'll stall them." "Chase, no." "Emma, go. Please." I looked into her eyes, trying to convey everything I hadn't said. "Trust me." The main door opened just as the connecting door closed behind Emma. Principal Matthews stood there, his face shifting from surprise to cold anger as he saw me. "Mr. Mitchell," he said quietly. "I believe you're supposed to be at the lock-in." "I got lost looking for the bathroom," I said, trying to sound casual despite my racing heart. "Sir, I can explain." "Save it." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "I had such hopes for you, Chase. A bright future. But now." He moved to his computer, checking it quickly. His face darkened. "What did you take?" "Nothing," I lied. "I was just." "Do not lie to me," he thundered, all pretense of the caring educator gone. "Where are the files?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I maintained, praying Emma had gotten far enough away. "Sir, I think you're overreacting. Maybe we should call my parents." He laughed, a harsh sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, we'll be calling a lot of people. The police, for starters. Breaking and entering, theft of private property. Your future is over, Mr. Mitchell. No college will touch you after this. Unless." "Unless what?" "Unless you tell me who else was involved. Give me the files back, tell me who helped you, and maybe we can make this go away. Think about your future, Chase. Yale doesn't accept criminals." I thought about Emma, about her Yale dreams, about everything she'd worked for. I thought about her eyes in the darkness, about all the things I wanted to tell her. "It was just me," I said firmly. "I acted alone." The next few hours were a blur. Police were called. My parents arrived, looking shell-shocked. Principal Matthews pressed charges, making sure everyone knew that the perfect Chase Mitchell was actually a criminal. But through it all, one thought kept me going: Emma was safe. She had the evidence. She could expose the truth. What I didn't expect was what happened next. As the police were leading me out, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Emma Lawrence, still in her lock-in clothes, was marching toward us, followed by what looked like half the senior class. Behind them was a local news crew, apparently, someone Jessica, I'd later learn, had tipped them off. "I'd like to make a statement," Emma announced, her voice carrying down the hallway. She held up her phone, which was live streaming to the school's social media accounts. "About the real crime at Riverside High." Principal Matthews went pale. "Miss Lawrence, think carefully about what you're about to do." "Oh, I have," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I've thought about nothing else." She turned to the growing crowd. "For years, Principal Matthews has been stealing from our school. Here's the proof." She didn't just have the financial records. She had emails, bank statements, everything. While I was getting arrested, she'd been gathering reinforcements and building an airtight case. "And Chase Mitchell," she continued, her voice breaking slightly, "is a hero. He helped uncover this corruption, knowing he might take the fall. He was willing to sacrifice everything to protect." She paused, looking directly at me, "to protect what matters." The night dissolved into chaos after that. The police, now more interested in Principal Matthews than me, released me to my parents. News cameras rolled as our principal was led away in handcuffs. Students cheered, parents demanded answers, and through it all, Emma never left my side. "You're an idiot," she told me later, when we finally had a moment alone in the empty hallway. "A brave, stupid, wonderful idiot. I couldn't let him hurt your chances at Yale," I said simply. "Chase Mitchell," she said, stepping closer, "did it ever occur to you that some things matter more than Yale?" And then, finally, she kissed me. In front of the news cameras, our classmates, everyone. And I kissed her back, not caring about tomorrow's headlines or campaign speeches or anything else. Because sometimes the person you're running against becomes the person you'd risk everything for. And sometimes, the biggest victory isn't winning the race, it's finding someone worth losing for. But our story wasn't over yet. Because even as we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms while camera flashes went off around us, we had no idea that the biggest challenge was still to come. The weeks following Principal Matthews' arrest were chaos. National news picked up the story, high school heroes expose corruption, and suddenly Emma and I were everywhere. News vans camped outside our houses, reporters ambushed us between classes, and our social media followers exploded overnight. "Your Yale interview is trending on Twitter," I told Emma one afternoon as we sat in our new favorite spot, the roof of her house, where no reporters could find us. She'd had the interview that morning, and someone had leaked that the interviewer had asked more questions about the scandal than about her academic achievements. "Great," she said flatly, staring at the sunset. "Because that's exactly what I wanted Yale to focus on." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around her. "You know what the worst part is? When they asked why I helped expose the corruption, they seemed disappointed that I said it was because it was the right thing to do. They wanted some calculated answer about showing leadership and initiative." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in her familiar vanilla scent. "You did show leadership and initiative. You just didn't do it for the college applications." The election had been postponed in the wake of the scandal, but now, with a new interim principal and the dust somewhat settled, it was back on. Emma and I were still running against each other, which confused everyone except us. We understood that some things were bigger than romance. But as the election drew closer, something began to change. Not between us, if anything, exposing corruption together had made our relationship stronger. No, what changed was our perspective on everything else. It started the day Emma got her Yale acceptance letter. She should have been ecstatic. It was everything she'd worked for. But when she called me that night, she was crying. "They want me to write an essay," she said, "about how exposing the corruption demonstrated my commitment to Yale's values. They're turning it into a publicity stunt, Chase. Everything we did, everything we risked, they just want to use it to boost their image." I thought about my own college acceptances, how every interview now focused on the scandal instead of my actual achievements. How reporters kept trying to spin our story into some kind of teenage vigilante romance, missing the point entirely. 2 days before the election, Emma didn't show up to school. I found her at Riverside Coffee, surrounded by college brochures and looking more lost than I'd ever seen her. "I don't want to go to Yale," she blurted out as soon as I sat down. I blinked. "What?" "I don't want to go to Yale, or be class president, or be the perfect Emma Lawrence anymore." She pushed her hair back frantically. "Do you know what I realized? I've spent my entire life trying to be what everyone expected me to be. The perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect candidate. And for what? So colleges can use my story to promote themselves. So I can spend the next 4 years being that girl who exposed corruption in high school." I reached across the table and took her hands, stopping their nervous movement. "Emma, breathe. What do you want?" She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before: freedom. "I want to live my own story. Not Yale's version, not my parents' version, not the media's version. Mine." She squeezed my hands. "Ours, maybe? If you want that too." And suddenly, I understood what she was suggesting. "You want to run away?" "I have savings," she said quickly. "And that's scholarship money from the writing contest. We could go anywhere, be anyone. No expectations, no perfect records to maintain, no reporters asking us to retell our story for the 100th time." She bit her lip. "I know it sounds crazy." "It sounds perfect," I interrupted, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Because here's the thing, I was tired too. Tired of being Chase Mitchell, the golden boy who sacrificed himself to expose corruption. Tired of having my future planned out by college admissions offices and guidance counselors and well-meaning parents. Tired of living up to everyone else's story of who I should be. But what about college? I asked, playing devil's advocate even as my heart raced with possibilities. Our futures? Emma laughed, and it was the freest sound I'd ever heard. "Chase, we uncovered a massive financial scandal, got a corrupt principal arrested, and managed to fall in love while running against each other for class president. I think we can handle building our own futures." We spent the next hour planning. We'd leave after graduation. Our parents deserved to see that, at least. We'd drive west in my old Jeep, take odd jobs, maybe take online classes once we settled somewhere. We'd write our own story, one where we weren't the perfect students who exposed corruption, but just Chase and Emma, figuring it out together. "You know what this means, right?" I said as we walked back to school. "Neither of us will be class president." Emma smiled, linking her fingers with mine. "I think we're running for something better now." The day before graduation, we dropped out of the race. Jessica Martinez won by default, and honestly, she'll probably do a great job. We sat through the ceremony, accepted our diplomas, hugged our confused but proud parents, and packed our bags in secret. Now, as I write this from a small coffee shop somewhere in Colorado, Emma asleep against my shoulder as she takes a break from working on her novel, I realize something: sometimes the biggest act of rebellion isn't running against someone, it's running away with them. Sometimes the most important campaign isn't for class president, or college acceptance, or public approval, it's for the freedom to write your own story. And sometimes, the person you're running against becomes the person you run away with, not because you're running from something, but because you're running toward everything you never knew you wanted. Emma stirs, blinking sleepily at my laptop screen. "Are you writing our story again?" I kiss her forehead. "Just the beginning of it." She smiles, that same smile that used to drive me crazy across debate podiums, now the smile I wake up to every morning. "Good. Because we've got a lot more story to write." And we do. Because this isn't a story about two class presidents who exposed corruption. It's not even a story about two straight A students who gave up perfect futures for uncertainty. It's a story about two people who found each other while running against each other, and decided that running away together was the most perfect campaign of all.